supposed to stand for speaking.
No, I think you're, do you have one of these for what I was told before? 6:01, let's start, we got to start on time.
All right, everybody, if we could take a seat, I think we're ready to begin. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, guys. And good evening to those who are joining us via Zoom as well. My name is Jenny Charles, and I am the president of the Tennessee Women's Political Collaborative. If you like politics, you are in the right place. Tonight, we will hear from 3 candidates running for District Attorney General of Nashville. I want to say thank you to the Executive Director of the Nashville Bar Association, Monica Mackey, as well as Attorney Ed Langquist for partnering with us on this event. There will be an opportunity at the end for audience members to pose questions, and you're going to see before you some note cards as well as some pens. So if you have a question that you'd like to pose to the candidates at the very end, if you could write down a question, our board member, Elvira Rodriguez, sitting in the back, about 20 minutes before the program ends, will collect those questions. Please phrase your questions respectfully and legibly. And for those of you watching on Zoom, if you have any questions that you think of that you would like to pose, we have another board member monitoring for those. So just shoot those over in the on Zoom. So with that, I will turn it over to our moderator for the evening, our past president, Attorney Stephanie Williams. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our forum, the Women's Political Collaboratives Forum, with the candidates running for district attorney. We want to first acknowledge that there is a lot of courage and strength in people that choose to run. We are very excited to have a race that has several candidates in it, because when people have a choice, people have a voice. And when people have a voice, that's democracy at its best. So we thank each and every one of you for being here and for running this race. We know that that is not easy. It's tough on you and your families and everyone involved, but we appreciate your commitment to this community and your efforts in running this race. For everybody's information, we are in person and on Zoom. So Zoom gets to see this display here. You get to see it all. And so I'm gonna correct one thing that Jenny said. We will be taking questions from the audience, but we have an opportunity in 2 places in the program for those audience questions to come in. One's in the first half and one is in the second half. So if you come up with stuff early in the program, please write those questions down and get it to one of our people so that I have the benefit of that to provide it to the candidates. The candidates were essentially given information about the format of things tonight. They were given information about the subject matters that we would be covering. However, they were not provided any questions in advance. We are going to just take them in order by last name in terms of how they will answer questions and present. And so that would put Mr. Glenn Funk first, Sarah Beth Meyer second, and then P. Danielle Nellis third. And when we ask questions, we will start with that, and then we will rotate to the second person going first, and then the third person going first, and continue on so that we don't have a pattern of the same people going in the same place in line. All the questions have a time limit. We will remind the candidates of what the time limit is. We do have a timekeeper here today. The timekeeper will provide you with notice for questions that are 2 minutes or more where you have a response time. You'll be given a 30-second notice as to how much time is left, and 10 seconds for questions that are 1 minute or less. We got questions from various sources, from bar members, from community members, from lay people. So we hope we have a good gamut of questions that are very informative and that make for an interesting program tonight. Again, we will take questions live here from the audience if you want to write them down, and we will take them on Zoom if you want to put them in chat. We will write those down. This event will be posted. It is being recorded, and it will be posted on the Women's Political Collaborative YouTube page for anyone who happens to miss our program tonight or would like to go back and watch it. So that's all the business I want to get out of the way. But next, I just want to give a brief overview of why the district attorney's office is so important to the public. District attorneys have such an enormous amount of decision-making power, and the decisions that they make have a huge impact on the community. They can decide whether criminal charges are brought to court, which cases may be dismissed, diverted, or to some extent, what sanctions that convicted crimes will face or criminals will face. And here's how the American Bar Association explains it. The primary duty of the prosecutor is to seek justice within the bounds of the law, not merely to convict. The prosecutor serves the public interest and should act with integrity and balanced judgment to increase public safety, both by pursuing appropriate criminal charges of appropriate severity and by exercising discretion to not pursue criminal charges in appropriate circumstances. The prosecutor should seek to protect the innocent and convict the guilty, consider the interests of victims and witnesses, and respect the constitutional and legal rights of all persons, including suspects and defendants. And I think that's a very fair statement in terms of what we would expect out of a prosecutor or a district attorney. In addition to investigating and prosecuting crimes, the district attorney's office also has a huge responsibility from an administrative standpoint. Here in Davidson County, the district attorney has approximately 150 people that serve in that office. And so there is a huge responsibility in terms of managing people, managing assistant DAs, managing support staff, and staff at all different levels. And so while we do understand the importance of someone who can be very strong in the courtroom and in making evaluations of cases and how to prosecute them, there's also some strength that needs to be found in administration. How well do you work with people? How well can you retain people? You know, how well can you foster a good environment in an office so that you have and keep good people? And so that's just as important. As we know, your team is just as important as anything else, if not more. And so that is a huge thing I think that a lot of people may miss in terms of that role. And we will ask some questions about that tonight as well. And here in Tennessee, district attorneys serve 8-year terms, one of the longest terms served by any elected official. I think judges, state trial court judges, and our local general sessions court judges serve 8-year terms. But outside of that, I'm really uncertain of any other elected official that serves a term that long. That's important too, because if you don't like him or her, you got 8 years to wait before you can get them out. So we want people to make good decisions and to be informed as much as possible. I want to go ahead and start off this evening by allowing each individual to address themselves or introduce themselves to everyone and provide a brief overview of their platforms. Please, candidates, when you do introduce yourself, let us know why you think you are the best candidate running in this race and what experiences that you have both on the job and off the job that you bring to the table that the other candidates lack. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for this presentation, and we are going to start with Mr. Glenn Funk.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate you all hosting us tonight. My name is Glenn Funk. I'm the district attorney. I started my career after I graduated law school in the public defender's office in Memphis. I'm the only district attorney in the history of Nashville that's ever served time as an assistant public defender. After serving there, I came here in 1986, worked for Tom Schreiber, who was the district attorney at the time, and then for the last year and a half under Tory Johnson. I was an assistant DA for 3.5 years. I left the DA's office and I started my own private practice doing primarily criminal defense. I did that for 25 years. 2014, my predecessor retired. I ran. I was fortunate enough to be elected to this office, and I've been the elected DA for 8 years. My time as a public defender made me a better assistant district attorney, made me understand what people were going through at the time they were charged. We're working for the working poor, or the folks might even be unemployed, but indigent, right? Made me understand the real needs, the collateral consequences of even an arrest, much less a conviction or incarceration. My time as an assistant district attorney made me a better criminal defense attorney, allowed me to understand a little bit more about the processes, the thought processes that an assistant DA goes through. It helped me to humanize victims and the trauma that they go through, as well as the grief that they deal with. Then my time as a private practice criminal defense attorney made me a better district attorney now, because I know what it's like to sit across the table from somebody who's stuck in jail and needs to be out of jail within the next 24 hours so that they can get out, get back to work, not lose their job, make sure that their family isn't homeless, make sure that they can provide for their family, keep their family together. It's that depth of experience, that broad experience that I brought to the district attorney's office. It reminds me of what District Attorney Tom Schreiber told me on my first day on the job. The most important part of being a district attorney is to know the difference between a bad person and a good kid in trouble. And I brought that ethos to the district attorney's office.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sarah Beth Myers, and I'm running for district attorney because we need criminal justice reform now. I have been a local, state, and federal prosecutor for the past 10 years here in Nashville. And for the past 5 years as an assistant United States attorney, I've been the civil rights coordinator and the human trafficking coordinator for 32 counties here in the Middle District. I became a prosecutor because I was inspired by survivors. Back in 2006, when I just started law school, I began working at Thistle Farms and established a partnership between Vanderbilt Law School and survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking. I saw how the criminal justice system failed those women, and I knew that I wanted to be a prosecutor to help them do systemic reform and get them the resources that they needed. So there are 3 pillars to my platform. The first is crime prevention. The second is civil rights. And the third is restorative justice. So from a crime prevention standpoint, our crime rates are increasing dramatically here, and they have over the past 8 years in Nashville. To address that, I'm going to divide the district attorney's office up into precincts and assign assistant DAs to neighborhoods to get to know the businesses, the churches, the mosques, all of the stakeholders that they serve, and to make sure that we don't know just what crime is happening, but understand why that crime is happening. Then we can tailor resources on the front end. I'm going to conduct the first civil rights criminal justice audit of Davidson County to make sure we understand precisely where the disparities are in our system, from arrest to sentencing, and continue to train law enforcement officers on violence prevention and hate crime identification. And finally, I will form the office's first restorative justice unit solely dedicated to helping people transition from incarceration with the resources that they need to be successful. If you want criminal justice reform, vote Sarah Beth Myers on May 3rd. Thank you.
This is awkward, by the way, so you all know that. I'm gonna unravel a little here. My name is P. Danielle Nellis. I'm running to be your next district attorney, and for the sake of those who are on Zoom, about half this room is made up of current ADAs, so I'm so glad to see them here tonight. I'm gonna start this conversation a little differently than I have. This is our third head-to-head forum in a row this week, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. And I think it's only fair that I address something that has been spread far and wide. I am not running because I am angry with the incumbent. Let us begin there. I am running because in 2013, my father-in-law, a Venezuelan immigrant, was murdered. And in 2014, my Black gay male cousin was murdered on 11th Avenue North in a series of what appeared to be hate crimes that were not investigated as such. And in 2017, over that year, we lost so many of our Sunday school children and church babies. And I did go to the incumbent then and I said, we can do criminal justice differently. I knew then, just as I know now, that the way we reform our criminal justice system is based on 4 principles. Those principles are prevention, transparency, community engagement, and restoration. Restoration is not reentry. It is asking the question, what is accountability? What is harm reduction? And what is healing? And that is the lens through which every case must be run. I know there's some excellent attorneys in this room who are willing to change the way we do criminal justice and ask just those questions for every single case. I also know that when we engage community, we are able to expand the options for accountability beyond just people who match certain demographics so that they can be filtered into diversionary courts. We can indeed divert them before they have to go into the court system. And I will not belabor you with all the points of my policy platform. It's 20 pages of light reading, and I'm sure we will get into it this evening with our conversation, but it is on my website. It's been printed because I'm the only candidate with a clear vision on how we move our city forward into what we can become, not just avoiding what we have always been. So I ask for your vote on May 3rd.
Thank you. Thank you all. Okay, we're going to jump right into things so we can stay on time and get all of our questions asked tonight, or as many of them as possible. This next question will be posed first to Ms. Myers, then Ms. Nellis, and then lastly, Mr. Funk. This question has a 2-minute time period to respond. The domestic violence laws in Tennessee require a police officer to make an arrest after determining the primary aggressor, even if the alleged victim does not wish to prosecute. There is evidence in published studies demonstrating that for family homicides, mandatory arrest laws appear to reduce the number of deaths. However, critics of mandatory arrest point out that the law produces voluminous arrests in some cases based on very little proof. It is not unusual for upwards of half of the domestic violence docket to be dismissed for failure to prosecute when the victim does not appear in court. And there are several reasons why a victim may not appear in court. Bond conditions prohibit contact between the defendant and the alleged victim, but in reality, we know that these are routinely ignored. Alleged victims are often called from the jail phones and asked not to come to court for the defendants. I'm getting to the question. In sum, getting someone to court who is reunited with the defendant or is afraid of the defendant because they are out on bond is a very difficult thing to do. Please discuss the specific measures you will take, or in the case of Mr. Funk, have taken to decrease the number of dismissed domestic violence cases.
Go. Okay.
2 minutes.
This is a very complex issue. And one of the reasons that I became a prosecutor in the first place is because I'm passionate about domestic violence. The reason that it's so complex is for many of the reasons that she just stated. I founded a nonprofit based on work out of my time in the domestic violence division in the DA's office. And it's called Advocates for Women's and Kids Equality. In the 8 years of that nonprofit's existence, we have drafted and passed 9 laws through the Tennessee General Assembly, many of which update the domestic violence code. One of those deals specifically with firearms dispossession to ensure that people who are convicted of domestic violence offenses go through a procedure, fill out a form listing their firearms that never existed prior to that law. Strangulation, we've updated the strangulation law in addition to that. Domestic violence law is so complex, and because of that, people just coming into the DA's office cannot be directly assigned to that division. It is truly an issue that needs to have sustained training and understanding by people who work in that office and who genuinely want to be in that division because of the complex nature. Just last year, according to MNPD data, 87% of domestic violence cases were dismissed by the current district attorney's office. Now, sure, they're difficult cases to prosecute, but we can do much better than that. And we have historically done much better than that. So we need to make sure that we're training assistant DAs on how to handle a domestic violence case, and more importantly, getting out into the community to break the cycles of violence by ensuring that we are teaching young children, both boys and girls, about not only red flags, but about violence prevention. We need to make sure that our children are understanding, just like Awake started a curriculum for kids and trafficking survivors to break the cycles of violence. It's about prevention and training. Thank you.
Ms. Nellis?
Thank you so much for that very long question.
I've got more.
Thank you. So excited. So this is a nuanced and complex situation. We know that domestic violence is not just about addiction or drug use. It is certainly an issue of power and control. What we also know is that our community has invested an extraordinary amount of resources in addressing our domestic violence issue. And yet we remain in, Tennessee remains has one of the highest rates of DV related homicides in the country. I would disagree with the statistic that 87% have been dismissed, because even if that is the actual number, it doesn't take into account that in 2021, we were just reopening our courts. And so delay did cause some issues with bringing prosecution. But with that in mind, we do need to implement better mechanisms for scheduling. Right now, we know that dockets are cattle calls, and so people are expected to show up, miss work, and miss many other things that are going on in their lives. And that is an inconvenience, particularly when domestic violence happening in homes. You are already experiencing certain instability. So going to court creates additional instability. We must address those issues. We have to have increased options for accountability. Often I know that cases are indeed dismissed because somebody has gone through a 6-month class, but we know when we're dealing with a lifelong behavior, 6 months is insufficient to change it, but we've got to have some continued options for addressing that underlying behavior. The way we expand those options for accountability is partnering with our community stakeholders to not only increase education at an early age and work on prevention, but to expand those options for accountability. We don't want people to commit crimes and have nothing done, but we do want to address the root cause and the underlying behavior. And most importantly, we have to include the voices of the victims. We know about victims that when we ask them, what do you want to see happen if you get to the root of it? What they want is for what they're going through to never happen to anybody else. And the options we have of jail, probation, or retirement, which is a Davidson County anomaly, is not necessarily sufficient. So I think there are options for doing better, but it's going to take all of us together to come up with those options and answers.
Thank you. Mr. Funk.
Thank you. Domestic violence still accounts for over half of the violent crime in Davidson County. I take domestic violence very seriously. In fact, I consider it the most important unit in our entire office. When I took office, there were 4 assistant DAs and 1 victim witness coordinator. Over 80% of cases were dismissed. And sometimes the cases that weren't dismissed, the victim was re-traumatized because even though she didn't want to go to court, district attorneys were making them take the stand and essentially re-victimizing them. The victim wants to have their own autonomy. I want to be the boss of me. The victim wants to be the boss of her. It's not always of her, but probably 95% of our cases are man on woman domestic violence. So what did I do? I said, well, let's make this a victim-centered domestic violence prosecution, right? So I built a team. 9 assistant district attorneys are now assigned to this unit. 9 victim witness coordinators are assigned to the unit. 3 prosecution support unit former police officers that are there to fill in the gaps on cases and to make sure that we properly support victims. We've also got an administrative staff that's there all the time. These 22 professionals are relentless in trying to help support victims of domestic violence and let them reclaim their dignity. Right. Our statistics right now, those outcomes that were quoted, it's not right. 2021, General Sessions domestic violence jail docket outcomes, we had a successful prosecution 60% of the time. Now, a successful prosecution might be a dismissal after they've done 52 weeks of a batterers intervention program. Right, only 21%, the statistic that our moderator gave, 50%, only 21% are dismissed because the victim refused to prosecute. Another 19% might be heard and the judge might dismiss. But 60% successful prosecution, and over 80% of the people that we meet with the day after the arrest, because we have an early intervention program, first of its kind in the country, though other people are starting to copy it. 81% of the people are showing up for court. That lets victims' voices be heard. They get input, and these cases are only dismissed, right? When they want it dismissed, and if the person's gone through some treatment program for victim-centered.
Thank you. All right, next question, 2 minutes. We'll start with Ms. Nellis. In the summer of 2014, the Tennessee legislature made it legal to carry a loaded firearm in one's car, even without a carry permit. Locked and unlocked vehicles are now providing a new source for stolen guns. Per MNPD data in 2014, there were 436 gun thefts from vehicles in Nashville. And by 2021, there were 1,305 stolen guns. representing a 199.3% increase. In 2017, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation published a report entitled Firearm Violence in Tennessee. Correlation does not always equal causation, but the report revealed a lack of correlation between population increases in Tennessee and the increase in firearm offenses in Tennessee.
Wait, do that again?
Yeah, okay. I'm reading somebody else's question for the first time. Correlation does not always equal causation, but the report revealed a lack of correlation between population increase in Tennessee and the increase in firearms offenses. So I'm assuming that means that just because we have grown in population, that's not correlated to the number of firearms that have been used in crimes, is what I'm understanding. Law enforcement across the state, as well as a handful of elected DAs, have requested the legislature at the very least to institute a fine on a motorist who leaves a handgun in an unsecured vehicle. The legislature responded by stating this would punish law-abiding citizens. Additionally, state law precludes local municipalities from enacting legislation regulating firearms and ammunition. So this begs the question of what, if anything, can a local district attorney do to counter the surge in stolen firearms hitting the streets? Are there any specific measures that you can think of that you have taken or will take if elected in your office as it relates to addressing this problem?
That was a lot.
Yeah, the next two will be short.
All right, so yes, firearms are a huge problem in our community. Yes, unlocked cars are a huge problem. We see it in the headlines. Yes, we are in a southern city, friends. And in the South, we have gun laws that are far more permissive than other places, which is why my goal is to build the modern model of prosecution in the South. What that means is we focus on community-based answers to addressing the violence. We cannot count on our legislature, God bless their sweethearts, to act in the best interest of Davidson County. We have seen it, right? And so advocating to the legislature, though a DA is not permitted to advocate directly, is not the answer. The answer is bringing together community stakeholders to come up with solutions. We are seeing this model implemented from the mayor's office already, right? A violence interruption model at the with Ron Johnson at the helm. We have seen it with Gideon's Army and with their violence interruption, though I know people had mixed feelings about them. What they did was present a solution that is data-based and is seen across the country, right? So we can find community-based solutions to interrupting violence, particularly gun violence, here in our city. And that is how we counter it. And we continue to bring awareness to the issue of leaving guns in cars that are unlocked. We advocate for people to lock up their guns. And I do believe we should support legislation, should it ever cross their desk, to hold people accountable when their guns are used in crimes that lead to death. That is a problem, right? My case, my family's cases both involved gun violence. They are unresolved cases right now, but I can only imagine where those guns came from. So I understand the very real impact of gun violence on our community, and I know that we can and must do better, but the way we do it is in community. We invite the stakeholders to the table. We identify the resources to address the harm that is caused by these guns and how to encourage or incentivize people not to participate in violent crime. It is not simply advocating to the legislature to fix these problems.
Thank you. Mr. Funk.
Proliferation of guns throughout Tennessee, throughout all of America, is a real problem. It's made us all less safe. When the legislature passed the law with regards to you do not have to have a permit in order to have a gun in your car, because they said your car was an extension of your home, that made us less safe, and it made all the police officers that we have on our streets less safe. Because every time they approach a car, even if it's just a traffic stop, they know it's an adversarial encounter, and they know they have to anticipate that the person will be harmed. Legislature made it even worse when they said that forget about your car, you can just carry a gun at any time, even if you haven't been trained, even if you haven't been licensed. I worked with Amy Wyrick, who's the DA in Memphis. We talked together and said, look, this is going to make our cities less safe. The governor took a call from the Republican district attorney of Memphis, and she brought her police chief with her, and she said to him, last year, Governor, do not pass this, it's gonna make Tennessee less safe. He said, well, this is part of my legislative package, it's really important. And then she said, and I thanked her for this, well, then at least do a carve out for Shelby County and Davidson County. Governor's response was, it's not about geography, it's about the Constitution. But I appreciate her at least trying. I was very disappointed with that response. My office has participated in giving trigger lock devices in community events. I went to the Fair Board and convinced them to quit having gun shows on a monthly basis to where not only would guns be sold at the fair, but it's really easy for dealers to go out and just sell them out of the trunk of their car, and all of a sudden weapons get bought and sold and unable to be tracked. Right? We prosecute all felony gun crimes. Over the last 6 years, we've had over 1,600 convictions, and we've worked with our federal partners as well, and they've done about 400 during that same period of time. So we're working really hard. Felony gun charges, not guilty, is only about 6 out of over 1,662. So we've been really successful on that. It's a credit to the hard work of the assistant district attorneys in my office.
Thank you. Ms. Myers.
All right, so we know that it's a problem, but we need to be preventing that problem. We need to be prosecuting according to that problem, and we need to be addressing legislation, and a DA should be a policymaker. So bringing legislation through the DA's conference, that's what it's there for. One of the main reasons it's there for, to identify policy problems and then to propose solutions legislatively. So right now, clearly we have a problem. What are we going to do to prevent it? That's my crime prevention model. By assigning assistant district attorneys to neighborhoods, we will understand why those car break-ins are happening in certain areas. So is it happening during the day in one part of town? Is it only happening at night? And is that consistent? What kind of people are breaking into those cars? What age groups? What breaking it down by poverty? What is happening then to those guns once they are being stolen? Are they being used in other violent crimes? We have to get to those from a neighborhood level, from a prevention standpoint. And that is what we can do through the division of the office into the neighborhood model. Then, from a prosecution standpoint, we have to start prosecuting violent gun crime in Nashville. That is a crucial thing we have to be doing, because right now, felonies being reduced to misdemeanors, people being released on low bonds, committing more violent crimes, and then being prosecuted federally is simply not a solution. And it increases mass incarceration. In federal prison, there are mandatory minimums on that side. So that is not what we should be doing, and we have to stop. And last year, 65% of firearms cases were dismissed by this district attorney's office. And finally, legislation. As I said, a DA should be working on policy. We have to make sure that we're proposing solutions, not criminalizing more behavior. That is not a solution that's realistic that will pass. But what about increasing car insurance for people who decide to store firearms in cars? That could be a solution that perhaps the legislature could get on board with. We have to think outside the box. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next question with Mr. Funk starting with the answer. Consistent involvement in the community. Oh, I'm sorry, back up. We'd like to know if you agree or disagree with the statement and then explain your answer, please. And you will have 1 minute each to respond. Consistent involvement in the community is an important component of the DA's office. Do you agree or disagree with that? If you agree, please explain why and discuss your community involvement over the last 5 years. That's it, that's the question.
The answer to that question is yes. Secondly, the statistic that Ms. Myers just said about gun crime, we do not dismiss 65% of the gun cases, which is completely wrong. We go to the statistics run by the courts and by our criminal court clerk. That figure is wrong. Now, with regards to involvement in the community, it's important to be involved in the community. I encourage all the assistant district attorneys to be involved in the community, whether it's nonprofits, where I was on the board for the YWCA for 6 years, whether it's Interfaith Dental Clinic, where I've been involved for a number of years, whether it's the ARC of Davidson County. It's important to know all the different constituencies so that we can have and be able to address needs. I went regularly to visit with the folks at 50 Forward. I've also worked with the folks that are the deaf and hard of hearing. So it's important that we know and support that we reach out to these stakeholders.
Thank you. Ms. Myers?
And if anyone has a question about where I'm getting my numbers, it's MNP data, which is available online on the MNP dashboard. So in terms of community involvement, of course, we absolutely need community involvement. That is one of the key things that we're missing currently in the DA's office. Not only should it be encouraged, but it should be actually required by the office itself, which is why I will be restructuring the office to make sure that ADAs are assigned to get to know neighborhoods, the businesses, the churches, and mosques, as I explained. We need to understand the issues facing the people that we serve. We can no longer afford to be a reactive DA's office. We have to be proactive in order to prevent crime. And that is our job. We have to make sure that both the community is safe and that we're doing that in an equitable way. And in order to do it equitably, we have to understand what's happening in our community. And that means we have to do the first civil rights criminal justice audit in the county. And that means working with an unprecedented number of nonprofits and community stakeholders, not just on the criminal justice side, but in another and variety of other factors as well.
Thank you. Ms. Nellis?
Thank you. I just want to be very clear that neighborhood and precinct alignment is two very different conversations. So I do agree that the office should be aligned with neighborhoods. And I know that some individuals in the office are participating with the community, but I think it should be systematized. Part of the plan that I would present to our incumbent is that we should, instead of having a general cup where you incentivize trying cases, you should incentivize community service within the office. My own community service, I've served with the National Bar Association, Napier Louis Bar Association. I'm a Sunday school teacher at Fairfield. I was the PTA president of my child's school. I'm regularly involved with youth and other community organizations. I teach diversity, equity, inclusion, CLEs regularly, and have been so pleased with the results of recruiting efforts in the DA's office. But most importantly, I know the DA's office must align with neighborhoods and be independent of police to the extent that they are able to be independent and not intertwined with policing, so that we are carrying out our mission of representing the state of Tennessee and the people of Davidson County.
Thank you. Next question, 1 minute. It will also be an agree or disagree with an explanation, starting with Ms. Myers. The DA's office has a responsibility to not only prosecute crimes, but engage in crime prevention efforts. If you agree, please discuss your involvement in crime prevention efforts or what you plan to do.
Absolutely. So as an assistant U.S. attorney for the past year, as a civil rights prosecutor, I have been going out into the communities in 32 counties to educate law enforcement about violence prevention to ensure that we are preventing cases of excessive force. We desperately need that training to be mandatory here in Nashville and all of Davidson County for local, state, and federal partners. In addition to that, we have been doing hate crime identification training as well. We have to make sure that we are actually identifying the nature of what is happening in those crimes. And we have to make sure that in terms of that preventative action, when crime does actually occur, which we can never stop crime, it will always be an issue in a society. But when it does happen, we have to have restorative justice to address it. And that is so we're solving the problem from a tailored perspective for that individual, making sure they have drug addiction treatment, mental health treatment, housing, and a good job so that it doesn't happen again.
Could you repeat that question again for me, please?
I will. The DA's office has a responsibility, this is an agree or disagree question. The DA's office has a responsibility to not only prosecute crimes, but to engage in crime prevention efforts. If you agree, please discuss your involvement in crime prevention efforts or what you plan to do in that realm.
Yes, I do agree with that statement. It cannot simply be about prosecuting crimes. In my policy platform, my primary tool for addressing or preventing crimes is actually through the expansion of the pretrial assessment and programs that are in place. Right now, when somebody's assessed pretrial, it is to go to the, with the sheriff's office, and I'm sure we'll get into bail reform a little later, but in the statutes, 116 and 117, it allows for us to partner with community-based organizations when people are released. Right now, we know that if folks are arrested and they're let back out, it's detrimental to not only the defendants, but also the victims who are being re-traumatized. But when we allow people to be assessed properly, identify the root cause and whatever trauma has brought them in contact with the criminal justice system, we're able to pair them with community-based organizations to address those underlying issues, get to the root cause so that we are less likely to see those people come in and out of our criminal justice system once more.
Thank you. Mr. Funk. Yes, 1 minute.
Obviously, the way to attack this problem is twofold. Number one, let's drive down recidivism. Right? Let's give folks what they need in order to be successful in the community. Whether that's the restorative justice program, which you report, whether that's the mental health court run by Judge Blackburn, or the behavioral care center run by Sheriff Hall, whether it's the CARES court run by Judge Bell, or the Hearts court helping victims of human trafficking run by Judge Escobar. It's important that the district attorney's office participate in the founding of those programs and continue the continued support of those programs. But even more important than that, let's address the problems even before they get started. I've been working with Inspector Imhoff and Judge Sheila Calloway on an assessment center in the juvenile court where kids aren't taken to juvie, right, on status crimes like runaway or curfew violations. Let's work on trying to make sure that folks brought to an assessment center instead of the courthouse, where they don't start to see themselves as the kind of kid who has to be taken to juvie. Let's give those families the supports that they need so that these young people in Nashville don't end up seeing themselves as criminals. Let's help them get through school, get a good education, and go on to either college or a great job.
Thank you. The next question, you will have a 2-minute response time. And we will start with Ms. Nellis. And this is a what would you do question. The sale of narcotics in Nashville and across the US looks a lot different than it did 10 to 20 years ago. Previously, crack cocaine, methamphetamine, and Oxycontin were the narcotics widely considered most addictive and destructive. And then comes fentanyl, which is now being used as a cutting agent in other drugs, unbeknownst to buyers. In fact, recently 2 West Point cadets had to be placed on ventilators after consuming fentanyl laced cocaine. The question, what charges would you present to a grand jury in a case where the proof obtained showed a defendant sold drugs to a victim who subsequently died as a result of using the drugs?
What charges would be presented to the grand jury for what? Again, I'm sorry, you said that very quickly, Stephanie.
Sorry.
I apologize.
What charges would you present to the grand jury in an effort to obtain an indictment where the proof obtained showed a defendant sold drugs to a victim who subsequently died as a result of using drugs that were sold, that he or she sold?
So I believe the homicide charges certainly would apply here, where there is knowledge or intent as to the drug dealing. Certainly addiction is an issue plaguing our communities, and we have seen an increase in deaths, particularly in certain pockets of the community, due to fentanyl and other the opioid crisis that is increased. So I don't think presenting homicide charges to the grand jury is outside of the scope of reality. I do want to note that when we're dealing with narcotics, you're asking about sale, right? So those who are selling drugs to others, yes. I also, is that correct?
That's
Okay.
correct.
But I also want to note, we have to address the issue of addiction, right? And we have to address the issue of the conditions that cause people to come in contact and decide or participate in drug use, right? We need to address addiction as a behavior and not criminalize the addiction as behavior. I know in this scenario, we're dealing with a victim who is potentially no longer, or who is no longer with us.
He's no longer with, he or
Okay.
she's no longer with us. We're talking about the seller.
Okay, clarifying the question here. So obviously a victim, we want to treat the victim's family with respect and dignity. We want to consistently make sure that the victim's family is supported as they're walking through the process, that the application of law is consistent in this realm, that the policy is clear from the office, that the office will pursue criminal charges where people are showing knowledge or intent of selling these drugs. But I also want to be very conscientious of the disparate impact of drug drug dealing, drug use, drug charges, and its impact on Black, brown, and poor communities. And so I think this is very much a nuanced question, and the person in the office has to be conscientious of the many nuances that go into this, certainly aware when families lose their loved ones, that there is pain associated with it, that we are not overcharging on the front end and selling to people hopes and dreams of high convictions that simply will not come through, as we've seen in
Okay,
with
I'm
our
going to cut
current,
you off.
with our current DA. So that is the rambling answer. I apologize.
Thank you, that's all right. General? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Funk.
3 years ago, I worked with district attorneys from across the state to propose legislation as fentanyl starting to run rampant in our community. Originally, fentanyl was just lacing heroin. Now it laces a number of other drugs as well. Fentanyl kills. So we went to the legislature and we advocated for a change in the law to where second-degree murder is now a proper charge if someone sells the user fentanyl and the person dies of the overdose. Currently, our office has already settled 4 cases that were fentanyl-related deaths where the person was charged with second-degree murder. Now, these cases are a little bit tough because many times it's 2 users who are sharing the drug, whereas that law is really targeting the narcotics distributor, right? And that's the person that should be properly charged with a second-degree murder. And so of the 4 that have already gone through the court system, most have been pled to a facilitation of second, and they've ended up with an 8 to 10 year sentence instead of a 15 to 25. We have one going to trial on Monday on the charge of second-degree murder. We got 3 others that are pending that have already been indicted. And I talked to Ed Ryan, who's the head of this division, earlier today, and he was telling me that we have 3 or 4 more that are being prepared up for indictment. So we take that very seriously. I'm also proud to live in a community where we have a drug court, where we have a recovery court, where we have a DC4, and all these programs, 18 to 24 months, so that people have a chance to have sustained recovery and get off of the drugs. Right? I'm also really proud that when I took office in 2014, we had a unit called the 20th Judicial District Drug Task Force. And what it was a police department run by the district attorney. It had 6 of its own officers, right? They did the investigations, they made the arrests, and then the office prosecuted those people that they arrested. When I took office, I was told $1.7 million was the budget, and we had to raise that through fines and civil forfeitures, a real problem, right? I closed that, put those responsibilities in the police department. We're lawyers, we handle the cases. The police department needs to do the investigations, and now I'm working with Chief Drake to try to make sure that as he's got his feet underneath him, that we can really target those major drug dealers.
Since this question only addresses the dealers, the major drug dealers, that's what I'm going to talk about. Homicide is an absolutely appropriate charge for something that is death resulting, starting with the dealer. Fentanyl is something that we have to take seriously. We have to start taking it seriously here in Davidson County. When the 20th Judicial Drug Task Force was dissolved, I'm not saying it didn't need some tweaking, that's what I'm proposing. What we need to do is have an opioid drug task force. We have an opioid crisis in this country. And what that would look like is local, state, federal law enforcement, the healthcare community, and the nonprofit community all working together to keep fentanyl out of Davidson County. Just last year, we lost over 600 people who overdosed because of this issue. And over the past 8 years, it's been thousands of people who have died because of these preventable overdoses, because we don't have a system in place in the district attorney's office with community cooperation to address it. I am going to end that and make sure that we do have the cooperation that we need to save lives. When I talk to voters, one of the main concerns that I hear is, I've lost a loved one, or I know someone who's lost a loved one because of a drug overdose. It is not acceptable anymore to say that it is not homicide. We have to be pursuing those charges, and they can't just be pursued federally, because that is what I see. We need to be handling that locally here in Davidson County. And the drug dealers are aware that we do not prosecute that to the fullest extent of the law in Davidson County. There is a public filing where drug dealers on a federal wire are actually discussing where to do a deal, and they say they have to do it in Davidson County. There aren't the penalties here that there are in other counties. That is unacceptable as well. Word is on the street, fentanyl gets free rein in Davidson County, and I will end that.
Thank you. We have an audience question that we'll take now. Mr. Funk, we can start with this line of questioning. How do you plan to balance managing mass incarceration and the rising numbers of repeat violent offenders? Or how have you done that?
First of all,
1 minute, I'm sorry.
1 minute.
1 minute.
The focus of our office is on violent crime. And any criminal justice theory is that the reasons why we prosecute cases in the first place: deterrence, rehabilitation, incapacitation. For the violent crime, the people that are the most dangerous, the serial rapists, mass murderers, then they have to be incarcerated. We've been doing that. We've been incredibly successful. We've got over a 95% conviction rate on all of the most serious felonies. But at the same time, we have to decrease our mass incarceration. In Davidson County, we have been able to decrease the number of people in our jails by over 50%. We lead the country in reducing mass incarceration. The way we do that is with programs, with diversion, with having a district attorney review cases before they've even been booked and processed, because there are serious collateral consequences, even to having fingerprints taken or a record. So we support folks in the lower level offenses, and we devote all of our resources toward the violent crime.
Thank you. Ms. Myers?
Restorative justice is exactly what we need to address the problem of reoffending. We don't have a unit in the district attorney's office right now. There is not a restorative justice unit that will be devoted to helping people transition out of the system and back into the community successfully. And for nonviolent crimes, to ensure that people have a non-incarceration-based solution for drug addiction, for mental health, for trauma, for housing, the issues that they need to have resolved in order to go back into the community. It's easy to end mass incarceration simply by not incarcerating anyone. It's hard to give them the safety net that they need to be successful. And that is why we need a unit of ADAs within the main DA's office solely devoted to helping people get at those core issues that are causing that crime to reoccur, and actually having solutions for them, as opposed to just saying, good luck, here's probation. This works in other cities, and we can make it work for us here in Nashville.
Thank you. Ms. Nellis?
An Office of Reentry Services is absolutely necessary here in Davidson County. It's something that should be run through the mayor's office, and there are very few cities our size that do not have offices of reentry services. And that is to help people reconnect with the community after they've been released. It is ludicrous to expect people who have potentially been traumatized by the system to come back to the same entity that has put them through the paces and help them accountable. But I do want to talk about restorative justice, which is accountability, harm reduction, healing. At the point that we start asking those three questions for each and every crime, instead of some of the crimes that go through some of the programs and maybe juvenile court and potentially expanding into adult court, when we ask that for every crime, then we start getting to the root causes of the issues that people are facing. When we see repeat offenders, it's because we have not addressed the root cause. In all of my experience when I've seen people who committed violent crimes, it is very rare that they have not had a series of appearances in court before that, which means if you come into court 5 times and then you commit a violent offense, then we have missed 5 opportunities to address the root cause. And we must be better about addressing the root cause of crime when we come in contact with people.
Thank you. So that transitions us nice into the next question that deals with restorative justice. This question, each of you will have 2.5 minutes to respond to, and we will start with Ms. Myers on this line of questioning. Interestingly enough, in crafting questions for today, our team discussed restorative justice, surprise, surprise. And it was, we had 2 schools of thought in terms of what people believe restorative justice to be. One thought that restorative justice is a way for victims and defendants to have a personal encounter that ultimately may lead to the ability of each party to be humanized by the other, and to some degree make amends and let go of the hurt and pain caused in the incident. And that what would potentially follow after that meeting could be a dismissal of the case or a sentence that is more favorable to the defendant, because the victim may now want to be a little more involved in being helpful to the defendant on the criminal side of things. The other school of thought is that some believe restorative justice, in particular, especially in violent cases that may involve murder, rape, or armed robbery, could be an important component of a case, but that the dismissal of a case or any reduction in sentence does not necessarily occur. So I would like to get an understanding from each of you which school of thought you may be more aligned with, or if you're not aligned with either one, what your thought process is as it relates to restorative justice, as well as what, given the examples of cases or a case that you've been a part of where restorative justice was in play. Ms. Myers?
All right, so I'm more in line with any school of thought that is going to be focusing on the survivor and the community that was harmed. But we have to make sure that what we're doing is including all parties at the table. I do have an example that I'm very proud of in terms of restorative justice that works. A few years ago, down in Murfreesboro, there was a vandalism of a mosque. Two young men in the middle of the night with spray paint and bacon and masks went and wrote horrific things on the outside of this mosque. They hung bacon on the doors, and when the congregation came the next morning and they saw what had happened, they were truly terrified. That was a hate crime and an act that absolutely terrified a community of people. So with that, in working with the mosque leaders, with the victims themselves, the members of the congregation, and the defendants and their attorneys, we came up with a solution. We would not charge those young men with felonies. We ended up charging them with hate crime misdemeanors. They did not spend any time in jail. They went and attended a service at the victim's request. They apologized publicly to the members of that congregation. And then finally, the leaders of the mosque came to the sentencing for both of those young men. And they spoke on their behalf and said, if there is an employer that calls to ask about what happened, we are here to stand up and speak for you. That, I believe, is restorative justice. That is a healthy resolution for a community, for defendants who didn't see jail time, who got to understand and get to the source of the hate, because it was a hate crime, and it was healing for the community itself. It is those types of tailored solutions that we have to be pursuing with restorative justice, that are not simply factory-based widgets in a system, people on a conveyor belt, to go into the same programs that don't work for them to turn around and commit the same crime again. I haven't heard anything from those young men in terms of any criminal issues in the past few years, but I have heard from the mosque leaders that they have had a better relationship with the community at large as a result of how we handled that case. We can do better, and that to me is restorative justice.
Thank you. Ms. Nellis?
Right, so as I stated with the last question, restorative justice is asking the questions: what is accountability? What is harm reduction? What is healing? The two examples that you gave really are, so one is about a programmatic implementation of restorative justice. So sending people to a space where they go and they accepted by both the victim and defendant, they come together, they're able to discuss, and that is down the road. Both parties have to agree. We see a program like that in juvenile court. My understanding is Judge Callaway has done a phenomenal job with it and is looking to expand it. But I would submit to you that it has to be more than just programmatic. Restorative justice, again, must be the filter and the ethos through which we run every case. We have to ask that for every case. Now, as far as implementing models in the office, I do think we have to expand the restorative justice programs in juvenile court, but I think we also have to do the same in adult court. proposed in my policy platform, nellisfornashville.com/issues for anybody that wants to read it, is a neighborhood courts model. We see it in other jurisdictions and it's proven to be very effective. And neighborhood courts is not the same as the community courts that we have now, or even the diversionary programs we have through the specific treatment courts. What it does is it diverts crimes immediately away from the court system, because what we know is when we are able to keep people out of the court process and out of the court system, we're less likely to see them come in contact with it again or continue to cycle through as we're seeing right now. We know that in Tennessee, 117,000 people get arrested in and out. And I imagine we're going to get to bail reform at some point, but again, getting back to that in and out without ever addressing root causes. That's what a neighborhood courts model will allow us to do. In addition to addressing the root causes of crime and holding the person accountable, it reconnects community with justice. Many people have experienced crime or know somebody that has in our community, and they have no clue the outcomes. That therefore makes our system ineffective because it has no deterrent effect and no community buy-in. A neighborhood courts model allows us to elevate the voices of moral authority in the community. It grants ownership in the community. It keeps people out of court in the community, and it really addresses our problems. So as far as answering that question, I would say that neither model is particularly where I lie, but I think of it more broadly and systemically in addressing our problems.
Thank you. Mr. Funk?
Sure, I align with both. The first step, though, had to be part of the model that we've put into a court where it's actually a diversion out of the court system. What restorative justice is where the person who caused harm has to deal with the person who was harmed. And the challenge is to make the person who was harmed whole, to make the community whole, to make their own family whole, and to make themselves whole. And ultimately, they end up with a meeting where the two face to face, and the person who was harmed can ask the hard questions. Why did you pick my house? How long did you case my house? Why did you go in at the time that you did? Because the person who was harmed might no longer feel safe in their own home. Dealing with victims, and whether it's restorative justice cases or a regular case in our office, we ask our victims two questions. How are you hurt? What do you need? What do we need for that person to feel safe in their home? Right? So what we did is I went out to Oakland, California with Judge Calloway, with Stacy Miller, team leader in our office, with Kathy Sinback, with Judge Calloway's office, with Commander Howie from the police department, and with Don Danny, the public defender. We met with the DA's offices in Oakland and in San Francisco and talked about their programs. Oakland had a recidivism rate, hundreds of cases every year, only 12% for juvenile crime. San Francisco was even lower, but theirs was still in the pilot phase. We talked with the folks at Impact Justice, which is the community-based organization that works with both cities. And then we came back here and we said, we want to do this as a city. We want to try it, but it's something that's a radical change like this. We need to do it as a pilot. So we spent some time and found a victims' rights groups that would work with us. Tennessee Voices for Victims works with the victims to make sure that this is a decision they want to make, not as a have to, but because they have had their rights explained to them and they choose this. I found a community-based organization, the Revive Institute. Travis Clay works runs that. That's an amazing institution. So far, we've had 49 cases go through that. 2 people have been convicted after they've gone through the program. That's about a 4% recidivism rate. That's amazing. Now, hopefully, we can expand it to adult court. And as far as the second part of your question, what I would love to see is an opportunity to have some restorative justice, even in cases where a person might have committed a murder, might have to go to prison. Right? Because what we need to do is make sure that the victim's family in those cases is made whole and has an opportunity for healing. If they want to participate, and we can help these families move on, get past the pain, the trauma, of what's happened to them in these cases, we want to make sure that we have healthy survivors, healthy families of victims. So that's what we're trying to do.
Thank you. All right. This next question will be 2.5 minutes with Ms. Nellis starting. The district attorney's office is often viewed as having the singular role of being a prosecutor. However, what many people fail to realize is that the role of the district attorney is also very administrative in nature. For example, you have to hire and oversee ADAs. You have support staff, public relations, and so on and so on. And this district attorney's office employs about 150 people. So that's a full-time job and then some. Having the right team, managing the team effectively, and strong administrative skills are just as important as prosecuting crimes. 2 questions. 1, what leadership and administrative skills and experiences do you have that can make you an effective manager of people and efficiently run a large office? And 2, do you envision changes to the current staffing, processes, procedures, or culture in the district attorney's office if you are elected or re-elected?
Thank you so much for that question. Such an excellent question. Before I answer it, I just want to make sure I address one thing. When the restorative justice programs were being put in place in the DA's office, back when I was there, I was in rooms where the incumbent stated he would never do it in adult court. And then in another room, he said he would, but now we're on the precipice of an election here. I find it very interesting that his answer has become a bit more solid. But to address administrative matters, I'm so glad to see so many people here in my office and so many people who were my interns. For several years in the office, I was responsible for recruiting, interviewing, orienting, training, and supervising our year-round intern program. Based on that recruitment, as well as recruitment of other attorneys in the office, we now have one of the most diverse offices that the DA's office has ever seen, and I'm so grateful for that opportunity. In addition to working with our interns and doing training and diversity, equity, inclusion training there in the office, I've certainly been in leadership positions. A few years back ago, was able to organize a statewide diversity, equity, inclusion summit among bar associations across the state. So that was a wonderful opportunity to coordinate with others, make sure we had all of our speakers. We offered 9 or so CLE hours with multiple tracks, so I was able to coordinate that. I've long been in leadership, administratively in the court, and being the clerk for the Honorable Judge Dalton, was able to interact with attorneys regularly and making sure that the things that aren't on the docket were still running smoothly, implementing policies pertaining to COVID. Prior to that in law school, I ran our Black Law Students Association, was the president, and we had the 2nd largest budget of any student group. Also served on the national board while I was in law school, overseeing our international negotiations process. By way of background, I've been a lifelong Girl Scout, got my silver award. I've been captain of multiple basketball teams that I have been on and helped coach our basketball team in the office. But certainly what I've learned from being an athlete is how to work with others. As far as changes in the office, I will not come in and fire anyone on the first day. I understand the trauma that was caused by those decisions. But I do believe, my understanding based on conversations with people not seated in this room, is that there is a toxic workplace. And I want to make sure that people in the office understand that they are valued, that they will be uplifted, that they will be put in places where their skill set matches, and they're able to serve this community effectively, because there are people in that office who care deeply and are passionate about this work. And I want to make sure that they are uplifted in this work as well.
Thank you. Mr. Funk?
First of all, I never say never. I do sometimes say yet. I'm not doing that yet, because first of all, we need to make sure the pilot is successful and then the first program is successful. When it comes to our office, we have a diverse group of 70 assistant district attorneys that do amazing work. I think we've got the best law firm in the entire state. I'm proud of the work that they do. I'm proud of the people that we have in our office. It's a diverse group too. When I took office, 3% Black, no Hispanic, 97% white. We're now 28% diverse. More importantly, we're 33% in leadership diverse. Okay. I've been able to achieve that level of diversity even while some people have left our office. Right? Gary Harper left our office to become the Inspector General for the city of New Orleans. And Escobar became a judge. Marcus Floyd left to go into the mayor's office, and now he's about to be a judge. Artie Griffin left to work as a lawyer for the Pennsylvania Senate. Sasha Beatty worked at the American Prosecutors Association up in DC. Great jobs, great leadership. We also had a number of folks leave our office and take jobs with very powerful firms like Waller Law. Elvira Rodriguez left us, hated that she left, but I was so excited that she was able to take her career to a level where she could have a job that she was so excited about. And I know she's going to continue to do public service work her entire career. She was amazing while she was in our office. You know, it's important that the district attorney's office looks like Nashville. It's important that leadership in the district attorney's office looks like Nashville. Right? We don't have to go out to different areas of town to ask questions where they're thinking if we've got representatives of all parts of town here in our office. Right? Our domestic violence division, led by Christina Johnson, is amazing. The other team leader, Ronald Dowdy, an amazing leader. Right? Chris Buford, first African American district attorney to be the team leader in a criminal court. These are important hires. It's important to do our best to retain great talent. Though sometimes they do move on to other jobs in the system or other jobs in other cities. We're fortunate to have that. I'm going to continue to try to recruit and retain the best lawyers so that we continue to have the best law firm in the state.
Thank you. Ms. Myers?
Thank you. With any leadership position that I've ever had, I can't do it alone, and I won't do it without trusting my fellow partners, my staff, my community partners. It is crucial for me to not micromanage. That is simply not something that I do. If you're in the office, I'm going to trust you, and I'm going to trust that we're on the same team. And until I learn otherwise, there's absolutely no reason for an issue. So in terms of office culture, it will be a very happy workplace. And I can promise as well that I will not come in on day one and conduct a mass firing. I recognize that you are all public servants, and I respect the work that you do for the community. Being a prosecutor is truly a calling, and you're doing it because you want to help people. And until I learn otherwise, that won't be an issue. So in terms of the experience that I have that makes me prepared for this role in terms of leadership, I have led local, state, and federal human trafficking task forces. When the NFL draft came to Nashville, I had a budget and I had a group of people to work with, and I got to build my own team. And I loved that part of it because it was something that had never been done before in the office. And so what we did was we reached out to the business community. We reached out to the Convention Visitors Bureau, to Lyft, to Uber, to the hospitality industry, to make sure that what we were doing was involving the community in preventing human trafficking. It was going to be specifically focused on a PR campaign. And as all these people came in from all over the world, not just the country, we would be ready to address that. And so I led that task force and had weekly meetings with the business community, with law enforcement, and then with nonprofit partners who would show up to the scene of an issue and be ready to address it. We used the TBI hotline for human trafficking, and we used task forces that also existed. We also cooperated with the local district attorney's office, in addition to district attorney's office in other counties. So I've done that on a massive scale, and then I founded a nonprofit. We had zero budget 8 years ago, and now we have full-time staff members who are doing nothing but working for advocates for women's and kids' equality, researching what policy needs to be changed, and continuing to draft curricula and build community relationships to ensure that we're addressing issues that are unique to women and kids in Tennessee. So those are the most relevant experiences that I have for this role, and I truly look forward to working with all of you and given that opportunity.
All right, thank you. Next question with Mr. Funk starting off. This is an agree or disagree question. You each have 1 minute to respond to this question. After a case is dismissed and qualifies for expungement, the expungement process is unnecessarily time-consuming, cumbersome, and burdensome on a defendant. There is a better way to streamline this process. If you agree with that statement, please advise of your thoughts in streamlining the process.
My time as a defense attorney, expungements were very difficult and expensive. Steps have been taken to drop the cost of an expungement. But what I've done as district attorney is I have Michaela Matthews in my office. She's the team leader for grand jury team. We also have 4 other great lawyers on that team. One of them tonight, Mark Gordon. What we do as an office is if someone calls into our office and asks for help on an expungement, we take it from there. We run their record, we find out if they're eligible for expungement. If they are eligible for expungement, we make sure we send the documents all over to the clerk's office. We give them help if they need to be walked over to the clerk's office, we'll actually walk with them. And we handle several every single day because we're trying to make it, because we're making a difference. We don't want people to have criminal records if we can't help them get those expunged. And I put the resources behind it to make sure it gets done.
Thank you. Ms. Myers.
Expungement is an issue that should be directly handled by the DA's office in a systemic way. So when I was on the board of Thistle Farms for the past 7 years, what I did was help organize expungement clinics, massive expungement clinics where we could get a number of, in this case, women survivors of Thistle Farms together on a specific subject matter to make it easier and streamlined for the defense attorneys who volunteered. We would get them all together, we would get Judge Bell, and then we would get Judge Walker, and they would come and we would get it all done on site. That can be done through the district attorney's office. There's no reason why that can't be organized en masse, and we should be doing that as a service to the community. In addition to that, not just expungement clinics hosted and sponsored with community partners through the DA's office, but in addition, we need to be making sure that people are getting their voting rights restored, because we want to make sure that people who have done their time need to be able to have a voice back in their community, because that will make them a stakeholder in their community by giving them their voice back. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Nellis.
Expungements are an issue of equity and justice. We have got to figure out a way to educate people on the front end that their charges are potentially eligible for expungement. When cases are dismissed, we've got to make it where it is automatic for them to have an expunged from their record. And then on the back, again, on the front end through the negotiation process and as the case is in court, we've got to figure out a way on the back end to automate it, because there's no reason that people should have to come back to court. They've already spent enough time there, come back and ask somebody for help. We have the ability to do it internally. I've talked to our criminal court clerk about some thoughts on that. He thinks that is definitely the direction we need to be moving in as well. And so that would be one of my primary focuses.
Thank you. All right. Next question. Each of you will have a minute to respond, and we will start with Ms. Myers. This works out well because what I will ask of Ms. Myers and Ms. Nellis, what is the one criticism you have of Mr. Funk as the district attorney you believe is most warranted of his 8-year tenure? After each of you make your statements, Mr. Funk, you will have the ability, you will have 1 minute to respond to their comments. Then, Mr. Funk, I will ask of you, what is your criticism you believe is warranted of each of your opponents based on what they are saying they're going to do with what some of their platforms are? And then I will give Ms. Myers and Ms. Nellis 1 minute to respond to Mr. Funk. Ms. Myers.
So without hesitation, I would say the rise in crime rate in Nashville. If the office were truly being as successful in every single department as the incumbent claims it is, our crime rates would not be consistently increasing. And that is something that I'm addressing through a variety of perspectives. From the crime prevention standpoint, which he just stated, we don't need to be going out into the community if our office is diverse. I think that is misguided. We need to be going out into the community with a diverse office, but to meet people where they are in the community. That is a complete shift and a re-envisioning of the district attorney's role in not only this city, but really in our society. So we have very distinct philosophical differences. But the main one is, if he's doing such a great job and it's been 8 years of success, then why do the crime rates keep going up? And why is it 80% people of color who were homicide victims last year? Why is the equity not improved throughout the criminal justice system? So that's the main issue that I have, the crime with the equity combined.
Thank you. Ms. Nellis.
What we require are systems level solutions to systems level problems. We know that 37208 still incarcerates the highest number of people in the country, and that statistic was relevant as of 2021, after 7 years under the current administration. We know that 60% of the bodies held in custody right now are Black and brown bodies, And that is the current statistic of people being held in jail after 8 years of this administration. So what I know is that solutions that have been presented have not addressed the systemic issues. Additionally, we must help our communities trust the criminal justice system. And that trust has been eroded with the abuse and the discretion of this incumbent over the years in his decisions pertaining to the current Ms. Vaught with Mr. Delkey, and then the officer, forgive me for getting his name, that shot Mr. Clemens, and we've seen a consistent pattern of behavior and decision-making over his tenure. And that erodes the trust any community has in the incumbent's ability to do his job.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Funk, you will now have a minute to respond to Ms. Myers and Ms. Nettles.
With regard to the crime rate, shootings are up because of the proliferation of weapons. There's no question about that. Our murder rate has gone up to the same level that it was at in 2000 and 2005. Though last year, because of cooperation between my office and the re-centralized murder squad that Chief Greg put together, we actually saw fewer murders in 2021 than we saw in 2020. We're the only major city in the country that saw a decrease in homicides last year. As far as total crime, though, we're actually slightly down. We track indictments every year, most serious cases, cases that need to be prosecuted as felonies. Those are actually slightly down by a factor of 45% over the last 8 years. We're doing a great job as a city, despite the fact that we are growing as a city. And I'm proud of our record in handling the cases that have gone forward and doing it in a fair and equitable way, in a way that keeps the city safe.
Thank you. Now, if you'll just keep the mic, Mr. Funk, would you please let us know what one criticism is that you have of your opponents?
My opponents are excellent lawyers, and they're fine people. They're both committed to community. If they are successful in this office, I'm going to do all, and in this election, then I'll do all I can to help them be successful in this office. If they are unsuccessful, and I'm successful in the election by contrast, then I'm 100% sure that with their passion for the community, that their careers will take them to places where we will be excellent partners going forward, trying to make Nashville the best city that we could possibly be.
Thank you. Ms. Myers, your comment to that, 1 minute?
Well, in terms of, I appreciate that. And I really hope that that will be the case, that we will work together, and that you will have a shift in viewpoint from that. Because unfortunately, that's not something that I have experienced on the federal level working with you. And that's something that I think that we can improve. And I hope to do that through the community as well. So not just between the two of us, but absolutely with a community-based relationship and bringing everyone and more voices to the table. So I hope that that will get better. I genuinely do. I think that we need more local, state, and federal cooperation. And I appreciate you saying I'm a good lawyer. And I think you can be a good person too, but not be good for the job at the time. And I think you've had your 8 years, and I think it's time for some new ideas.
Thank you. Ms. Nellis.
Oh, that was so kind. Thank you so much for those compliments. I am committed to community. I'm committed to doing the work that is necessary in our community, the community that my family's been a part of for over 6 generations. I am also committed to setting a clear vision to move our city forward. With all due respect to the incumbent and the work that he's done and the wonderful people that are in the office, the trajectory that we are on is simply not going to work with Band-Aid solutions. We really must reimagine together. And I invite each of you to reimagine with me how we do criminal justice better in a way that meets the needs of victims, defendants, and our community as a whole. We must proactively address the issues that our own growth has created, including displacement, food insecurity, and many of the 649,000 median home price last month. We have to really work together to address the issues that our own growth has caused, but also embrace our growth as a way to identify and align resources to move our city forward. And I'm looking forward to doing that work and hope I will earn each of your votes here tonight.
Thank you. Ms. Nellis, if you'll hold the mic. One last question that we have prepared tonight. I do have 2 audience questions that if we want to go over, we can address. In a closing question from our end, being a district attorney has got to be very, very difficult. And everyone here has presented ideas about what you will do and how you will do it. And the reality is, you may find implementing some of those ideas may be challenging, difficult, and possibly impossible. And it is a given, there are going to be people that are going to be strongly opposed to things that you do. Additionally, there will be difficult choices you have to make in high-profile cases about prosecuting a crime, settlement terms, or even taking a stance in opposition to what our legislature has mandated. Again, no matter the decision that is made, it will be met with strong opposition, highly publicized, and controversial. The question is to Ms. Nellis and Ms. Myers, what do you expect the most difficult part of being a district attorney will be? And to Mr. Funk, what has been the most difficult part of this job for you? 1 minute for each of you.
What I am proposing is a reimagination of our criminal justice system. And anytime we are asked to reimagine something and do differently than what the status quo has been for years and years and years, both the federal and local level, it will be difficult. But what I know is that I have a clear and written vision. And what that does is if elected, when elected, believing that I will be elected, that says to the people that this is what you're choosing, not Danielle because she's the most qualified, though I do believe I am. It's Danielle because she set forth the vision. And this is the vision that we are supporting. And what that looks like going into next year as we have elections for a mayor and council people is reminding them that the people said, this is what they want to see in their city. This is what they want to reimagine, what they want to do differently, and holding those politicians to the fire to give that support. So we have that political willpower. And I know it's not easy, but I know Nashville can do it because I've seen it in my lifetime as we responded to crises such as a tornado, flood, and a pandemic. We can do this together. I know it.
Thank you. Mr. Funk.
The hardest part about being a district attorney is having your heart broken every single day. Got a number of our assistant district attorneys that work in domestic violence here with us tonight. And those folks sign up for a job where they deal with 10 to 15 people every day who've had some real trauma in their lives. And they've also got a amount of grief because life that they thought they were going to have, they don't have. Because now all of a sudden, they've got to deal with the fact that they have been victims of domestic violence, victims of violent crime, and how in the world are they going to make sure that not only are they healed, but make sure that their kids grow up in a family where they don't learn this behavior for the next generation. It's not just domestic violence, though, whether it's a family of a murder victim, whether it's a rape victim, right? How do we help those folks turn into survivors? And how do we make sure that we end up being just as able to help the next person that I'm going to meet with on a day, and every one of the assistant district attorneys meets with on their next case? That's the biggest challenge that I have.
I think the biggest challenge for a prosecutor, period, is striking a balance and making sure that you're trying to heal the harm that happened. If it's a child who witnessed the boyfriend throw the mom down the stairs and called 911, if you're holding the hand of a sexual assault survivor, if you listened and followed the wishes of the victim, because you always trust the victim and knowing what she knows is safe for her at the moment, who comes back and finds you later saying that this time he hit me with a baseball bat. Those are the issues that I struggle with as a prosecutor. But what we have to be wary of with those very human traumatic cases is not to chase headlines and to make sure that we're doing the right thing in every case, regardless of how it might look in the media. And that is something that is difficult, I think, as a human being. People want attention naturally, but we have to fight and resist against that to make sure that we're doing the right thing for the victim, the defendant, and society as a whole.
Thank you. All right, I have one last question. I know we're running over probably by a couple of minutes that I want to ask that came from the audience. We have 2 audience questions left. One, I think, was more directed towards Ms. Myers. This one, I think, gives an opportunity for the full panel to discuss. So that's the question I would like to present, if you will allow me to. And this question will start with Mr. Funk answering. Is that right? That's what I had there. Okay. He looked surprised, so I was like, all right, there are both civil and criminal liabilities for many actions. A recent salient example of this is the Vaught nurse trial and conviction. Ms. Myers has said criminal prosecution should not have been pursued in this case and instead leaving it for civil remedies. What consideration would make your determination whether to prosecute or not in these kinds of cases? What similarities or differences do you see in this Vaught case and in other high-risk custodial care type jobs like police officers?
How long do it have?
1.5 minutes.
You got 2.5?
We're already over time. 2.5, I'll give it to you if I have an audience that'll stay.
When the TBI brought that case to me, I found out that the Dr. Vaught case was not about a single mistake. They brought me that file. There were 17 instances of gross neglect that led to a painful and gruesome death for the victim, Charlene Murphy. Those 17 instances included taking the wrong drug out of the medicine cabinet, not properly searching for the correct drug, overriding the computer, failing to verify with the pharmacy, failing to type in the correct name of the medication, neglecting to read the computer screen, not paying attention when the sticker on the pocket drawer said warning paralyzing agency, never visually checking the medication, not having a second RN check the medication, not properly identifying the patient, not scanning the medication and the patient wristband prior to giving the drug, not checking the medication name on the vial, reconstituting the medication, taking the vial that had this top, right? And the first thing that she had to do was swab the top to sterilize it. Then she had to stick a needle through the blue bullseye there to put in some saline solution to reconstitute the drug. She then had to shake the vial to reconstitute it and mix it up. Then she had to stick another needle back in, draw out the paralyzing agency. That can't be 2.5 minutes.
I went ahead, yeah, I did 2.5. I'm being generous here at the end.
Then administer that drug to Ms. Murphy. Once she administered the drug to Ms. Murphy was becoming paralyzed. And what did Redonda Vaught do? She left her patient. Ms. Murphy then lay on a gurney, and over 30 minutes, she was paralyzed but conscious and awake and knew what was going on. She died a gruesome death that one expert has told us the only death worse than what she had to suffer was if she'd been burned at the stake. That's how bad it was. For 30 minutes, she lay there dying, and ultimately, when she passed away, she was not even able to call out for help. And if she had been able to call out for help, Redonda Vaught wouldn't have heard her because she wasn't even there. She left her to die on that gurney. This was not a close case. But even though I saw this and it seemed obvious to me, we reached out to medical professionals. 30 medical professionals told us, yes, this is gross neglect, and the case needed to go forward. We talked to 10 experts. They all said this is gross neglect. The case needs to go forward. At that point, we brought the charge. Grand jury indicted. The jury convicted her after hearing
Mr.
3
Funk,
days
I'm gonna have to
of
cut you off now.
After hearing 3 days of proof, and I apologize, but this is important. That was a unanimous verdict from a jury that included 2 medical professionals, a nurse, and a hospital administrator.
Thank you. Ms. Myers? 2.5, yes.
I will not prosecute medical professionals who make mistakes that amount to civil malpractice, period. It is so important in our society that we have a separation of criminal and civil procedures. We have an epidemic of violent crime here in Nashville. That crime, that reckless homicide, negligent homicide, abuse, That was a mistake and that was unintentional. And if we're going to prosecute Ms. Vaught, where does the slippery slope end? Medical malpractice occurs every single day, not just here in Nashville, but across this country. This is a national issue of national scope. I've heard from nurses all over the country over the past weekend about how they are terrified to continue practicing in their profession because they are human beings who make mistakes. Meanwhile, we have people committing intentional homicides here in Nashville that are unsolved. Let's focus on the intentional crimes and let's not prosecute the people who have been serving us through a pandemic, who take care of us when we're sick and will one day take care of all of us because we need that medical care at one time or another. She was stripped of her nursing license. She will never practice nursing again. There is a settlement outside of court that paid a lot of money. We don't know exactly what, right? Because it's a non-disclosure agreement, but there was a lot of money paid through a civil procedure. Does she need to go to jail to make a point? Then what is the point? How is she a danger to the community at this point? She can no longer practice medicine. So what are we curing here? And that is the question that we need to be answering when it comes to restorative justice. What is the harm and what are we curing? There is no prosecution in a vacuum, especially when it involves an entire community of healthcare professionals. This is something that we need to take extremely seriously. We are a healthcare community here in Nashville. Doctors, nurses, respiratory therapists, home healthcare, hospice, medical malpractice every single day. Where does this kind of prosecution stop? And I am assuring the medical community that that will not be something that I do, because we don't need slippery slopes in industries like that that are life and death.
Thank you. Ms. Nellis.
Before I talk about what I would have done in this case, I want to note that there was a victim. And that victim's family has been left out of a very public conversation here. And having lost family members unexpectedly, I certainly understand that they experience pain and they've had to go through a very public grieving process. So I don't want anything I say here to diminish their grieving process, and to be very clear about that. My understanding of how this case got to the DA's office is very concerning to me. Obviously, this situation happened in 2017. It was investigated by the nursing board. They went through their process just as we have a board of professional responsibility as attorneys, and other professionals had their licensing boards. The board did look into this case. They did not pursue it. After an anonymous tip and the involvement of state and federal authorities, it then gets to our DA's office. And it also involves a very large employer here in the city who had a very unique interest in the outcome of this case. And had we not had other issues with the incumbent and his decision-making, I would likely trust his decision-making in this situation, but we know that his decisions are often politically motivated. As to this case, I will say that the elements of medical malpractice should have handled this completely. And I understand that it was horrific, and I do not want to minimize what happened to the victim, and I don't think Ms. Vaught minimized that. And I will say that each case has to be examined on a case-by-case basis, but it did have a chilling effect on our medical professionals here in our city that the case was brought in the first place. It has created an outcry among medical professionals who we trust, particularly in this environment, in the midst of a global pandemic, to do their job. And so I've heard from many. I happened to go to my child's pediatrician recently, and he had concerns with this case being brought. But what I will say is I don't believe this case should have been charged. And I also don't want to diminish the work of a jury, because we are legal professionals, we are litigators, we take cases to trial. And if a jury of 12 did reach an outcome, I don't want to ever undermine the work of a jury, because we believe that to be the ultimate measure of justice in our criminal justice system. So I want to be very careful about that. But in this case, I do not believe that charges should have been brought, and would very carefully examine any similar cases moving forward.
Thank you very much. Again, I want to thank each and every one of you for being here this evening, for running for this office. We appreciate the time that you're taking to allow people to understand a little bit more about you, your ideas, your platforms, your backgrounds. And we just appreciate your participation tonight. So I'd like to give you a hand for being here. And on behalf of the Women's Political Collaborative, we thank all of you here and in the Zoom world. I do exist. I'm here for tuning in tonight. Please check our website for more informative programming that we consistently have. And have a wonderful evening and be safe. Thank you all. Thank you.
I'm gonna end the Zoom.
I'm going to end the Zoom.
I did.
Meeting for all.